What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Adkins and Miguel Iturrate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Atkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms, the House Call Sports on YouTube, the Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.
All right, this is Todd Atkins. I'm back with Miguel Iturrate, Mystic Miguel Iturrate, and we're going to do kind of a weekend recap. We don't always do shows like this, but I think have some interesting things to look at here in relation to the two, one mega event, and the other. I don't know if you call it a mega event, but it was I guess, a big event, UFC event. But really, Miguel, what I wanted to start with you, obviously, Paul versus Tyson got a ton of attention Friday night. I just wanted to kind of let you just go away on it right now a little bit.
I'm not a fan of these types of spectacles. At the end of the day, Mike Tyson, in his heyday, was there. With Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, and Mickey Mouse, and Mike Tyson was probably the most famous out of all of them in his heyday. And I think that that's kind of what was part of the attraction, nostalgia, that people were hoping that Mike would have the magic. And Mike, carries himself. He's a public figure now. He's all over social media and stuff like that. And in a social media world, he's released enough 30 to 45-second clips of himself training where you could almost still see flashes of what he once was. And I felt, to me, the feeling I got, and I saw a lot of people, including Teddy Atlas, talk about this, is the moment Tyson just walked across the weigh-in stage and slapped him in the face, I said to myself, this will work. Because, uh, it just seemed so fake, and I do believe that that's kind of what we saw. There's a lot of that undercurrent of talk out there, but let's set that aside a little bit. Um, I think that Jake Paul benefited from, he picked the right guy, an all-time great, a guy that his name resonates worldwide. Everybody knows who Mike Tyson is, who's especially, unless you're 15 years old, he's not that important, because you never saw what he once was. But a lot of the people that pay the Netflix bill, would obviously know who he is, you know. So you're in a situation there where this was a mixture of curiosity and nostalgia that led to the big event, 75,000 people in Dallas. I wonder, if you're sitting at home watching it on Netflix, okay, whatever. I wonder how many people in Dallas Stadium after the fight regretted paying for the ticket, because I think that there's a lot of them. I was monitoring some of the live feeds and some of the conversations that were going on all over the place. One person who was very critical of the fight, talking about how boring it was, and how Mike was a shadow of his former self, was the last guy that Tyson got into the ring with, and that's Roy Jones. And Roy was actually talking about how he didn't even look as good as he did, a few years ago when they had their exhibition. Age is one of those things where it's hard for you to see it in yourself, but everybody else can see it in you because you're going through it every minute, every second. But if you haven't seen somebody for a few years and then you see them again, you're like, oh shoot, they got old. So, I think Mike, you know, I'm one of those people that I think Michael Tyson has led, one of the most amazing, controversial up and down with a lot of, now he's on one of his ups, which I'm happy for him and I'm glad for him. But he's had one of the most roller coaster, fabled. I don't know what the right word is to encompass it, but he's had a life that we've all gotten to watch, and it's an amazing. I mean, everything from tragedies, his jail time, his comeback, his, you know, I always enjoyed one of his quotes, and he did a spoken word tour um, a few years back, and it was interesting because that spoken word tour was based on the fact that he was getting sober, and he later, now he smokes pot, but I think he's sober from all the other dope and drinking and things that he might have been doing. But that spoken word tour he did while still actively using something and faking it. You know, that in itself is a pretty incredible thing. But his ability to face the public and have the public. Mike Tyson can't walk into a store. He can't go shopping. You know what I mean? It's like I remember if you've heard the name, if you're younger, if not, obviously you'll remember if you're older. Andre the Giant, the pro wrestler. He had that kind of life. He couldn't walk into a mall and go shopping or do anything in public because he was immediately recognized by everybody around him, and then all of a sudden that became the big deal. Tyson, as he's not an average man. He's obviously, athletic and wide and thick and noticeable, but he's 5'10", 6 feet tall. He's 5'10", but he can't just go shopping, go to a mall or anything like that. Everywhere he goes, he's going to be noticed, and he's dealt with that his whole life. So I think, the money on this one got to the point where he couldn't say no. I mean, he's had money. I mentioned the spoken word tour. The quote I was going to mention from that tour is that he said he can't think of too many people who made $350 million twice and lost it. You know what I mean? So he made the money, was broke, and then made the money again. And he's talked about how towards the end of his career, when he wasn't into it anymore, and he was not the killer that he was coming up, the Pete McNeely fights and things like that. But he was paid more for those fights than any of the fights at the beginning of his career. So yeah, he made and lost two fortunes. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I think nowadays with he invested in a marijuana growing company, and that's been lucrative for him, and he's been able to take care of his family. And we talked about tragedies. He had a daughter die in his own home in an accident on a exercise machine. He was a treadmill. Um, Imagine finding, she had to be, I'm guessing, but I believe I'm 100% sure she was under 10. I believe she was 6 years old or something like that. How so the guy, to get motivated for this, the money had to be right. The reports are he made $20 million. That sounds, he's made more than that for fights before, but not one this easy. I think that's how he must have looked at it. And at the end of the day, he got hit a lot in this fight because you're fighting a guy half your age. But Jake Paul, for all the talk about how much power he has, and if you listen to Joe Rogan, tapping the fight, oh, he's a professional boxer now. It's like he's fought. This is probably the second boxer that he's fought. Everybody else has been a non-boxer crossing over to boxing. He's fought guys smaller than him, guys older than him, and you know, Tommy Fury isn't exactly the top shelf boxer that Tommy Fury being the one guy that beat him. So and since he lost to Tommy Fury, he hasn't tried that again. And he hasn't. Ngannou lost to Tyson Fury, kind of at the top of the game, and he came back and fought another real boxer. You know, Jake Paul lost to Tommy Fury and hasn't fought a boxer since. So what you're looking at here is a modern day orchestration on the part of Jake Paul that people have bought into. He also supposedly made 40 million for this. So, congratulations, people. You've made, him rich. Again, Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia combined didn't make $40 million for, one of the higher level boxing matches we've seen in the last decade, or the last 5 years or whatever. Terence Crawford probably never made even $10 million for a fight. When you compare what the best boxers in the world actually make, Pacquiao, yeah, he's made that. Fury has made that. Maybe, Fury with Ngannou, they have bigger purses in this fight. And that was a spectacle too, but that was a real attempt, and I think you could take that fight and the fight we saw between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson and see the difference between a farce and a real fight. And there's no as a person who's seen more fights than anybody but maybe 10 people in the goddamn world. There's nothing about what went on, in Dallas Stadium this weekend that impressed me. And I knew it going in, so kudos to Netflix. They made themselves a boatload of money, and they put sports, on their radar. Maybe I'll let you intervene and ask your questions.
Right. That's I was talking to Miguel about this offline, but it's really the one question that I had because everyone's talked about the fight or whatever we want to call it at this point. But really, my thing in watching the show is what was Netflix reaction to the event that they pulled off? Because you had so many people. I mean, the stream was difficult for people to watch because so many people were trying to get on there and watch it. I had to use my phone to watch it because I couldn't get to work on my TV. And yeah, it was just they had tons of fans at Dallas Cowboy Stadium, and millions and millions of people, more than the UFC could ever dream of having on an event trying to watch there. I doubt Jones did 300,000 buys, maybe. The viewership that they had for that fight on Netflix is something no MMA promotion will ever achieve, or even come close to achieving. And yeah, I'm just wondering if Netflix saw, maybe we could, because in my heyday, HBO boxing was awesome. They had a huge stable of fighters. They had Boxing After Dark. It was like one of the pillars of HBO. You could, any weekend, you could see some really good, talented fighters. And I was just wondering, maybe Netflix came away from that saying, if we can put this in front of enough eyes, maybe we can bring something like that back a little bit.
It's an interesting proposition. I think that I open with something that they should take in mind, and that is that they had a spectacle. That it's not really a sport that they saw, and that the spectacle attracted eyes. So if they were to go, say, do a weekly or a monthly boxing event, a monthly might be a little bit more of an elite. If you're getting into a weekly event, they're going to be, some events are better than others. They could go 5-6 months and not attract the number of eyes that they did for this weekend. For a standard, HBO boxing or Tuesday night fights kind of program. At the same time, Netflix apparently has changed their model for content where they're no longer like putting money into developing series that are exclusive to them. They're more buying content up from other sources, even older stuff. So having something fresh and new and live, I think could be interesting. Could be something that's the next step for them. I think it becomes more interesting if they were to open up a sporting division and actually look at MMA. Potentially the UFC, potentially, you know, it looks like I noticed on social media this weekend on a different, topic, but somebody got the smelling salts out and woke up Don Davis. Don actually complimented Dana White on the 309 card. He said, so Don for a change actually watched MMA as well. But he's a businessman, and maybe he is able to get ahead of the UFC and sell his product to Netflix. I think because they need content. If they open the sporting division and they want to go into combat sports, they might be best off offering a combo platter of MMA and boxing.
And
Maybe.
Paul has some connection with PFL.
Yeah.
Don Davis was at the event. He was in the front row, I think, at the Paul versus Tyson.
Hey, the smelling salts work then, huh? He's not passed out at the wheel. He was rumored to have slept in the parking lot in his Mercedes Benz because he just took it all out of him. But yeah, like I said, he's a guy. I'm just not impressed with him, but he's a guy that on the business end is supposed to be that's his bread and butter. So you will have to assume that if Netflix is going to head into sports, that he might be somewhere in the mix. So Netflix would have to realize that with PFL and boxing, they're not going to have great ratings, especially boxing. What's the model? Because even with the HBO days, like you mentioned, yeah, HBO was the bread and butter, and you got to watch it as part of your HBO fee every month without paying extra. But the major stuff was put on pay-per-view.
But we saw a lot of those guys come up: De La Hoya, Mayweather,
Yep,
all
no, for
these
sure, for
guys,
sure.
Gotti, all these guys that went on to be great fighters. We saw them come up on HBO as people that nobody knew.
Yep.
And I became a fan of boxing through those shows. It wasn't like I just said, I'm coming to HBO to watch boxing. I was a kid.
Yeah, and the thing about HBO too is that they had legs. They did it for I don't know a decade more. And Netflix has a short attention span. It's modern times. Everybody has a short attention span. So they would have to make a commitment to say, okay, we're going to build a library of 10 years worth of this stuff. And I think that would have some benefit because, when they wind up with a classic fight, people, don't put it on YouTube. People would have to go back to Netflix and, access the old library, and they would still get benefit from having that on their platform. But I think that if they think that they're going to, equal the results of this past weekend, that's not going to happen. But I think they'd have to make a dedication to a weekly show. Maybe boxing on Friday, MMA on Saturday, and that would change the dynamics of the sport and take it to the next level. Because at the end of the day, Netflix is a modern distribution method and is a wide distribution method. The availability of the Paul Tyson fight on a worldwide basis is one of the things that made it unique and one of the things that made it such a box office smash. 75,000 people showed up in Dallas. That's kind of a different story, but I think people wanted to be a part of that. But how many millions more than your standard pay-per-view or your standard American TV audience or cable audience or whatever watched it on a worldwide basis? That's where Mike Tyson's fame comes in, is that, you think of a boxing hotbed, the Philippines, I'm sure people, they got people tuning in from there. I'm sure they got people tuning in from all over the world that they normally wouldn't. And so a boxing show, I think you have to you tailor back the audience a little bit. It's not like people are going to watch an American boxing card, fervently like this, all over the world. But if they need the programming, it's a natural thing because the sports are sitting out there kind of, it would take for Netflix too, with the deep pockets they have, it would take minimal investment to actually crank those shows out.
The example I gave is like Cobra Kai, right? Netflix made a series called Cobra Kai. People didn't know squat about. They had to be our age to know anything about Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence. But look at the popularity of that. That just exploded because Netflix made the series, put it on their platform, and all these different generations of people saw this new thing.
Yeah, look, because Netflix is a modern delivery system and it's worldwide, that is a next step of distribution. It would absolutely be a boon for boxing and the sport of boxing, and even for MMA and the sport of MMA. We just had John Jones against Stipe Miocic. John Jones, it's John Jones or Conor McGregor, who's the biggest UFC star. They're not probably going to come close to a million pay-per-view buys for this weekend. So if they put it, on Netflix, they'd probably get 5-10 million people watching it.
Yeah, what's
And
the trade-off? You've been in the business. What's the trade-off there? 5 to 10 million watching versus 300,000 paying.
Yeah, for the UFC, they'd have to, what fee would Netflix pay for them for that type of show? To do the package, to do the whole season. That might look similar to, you know, uh, NBA, NFL. These types of sports get massive packages from the distribution of television, cable, and they've diversified. So, they've done it deliberately. Now there's always a Thursday night game. It used to be just Monday night and Sunday all day. Now there's a Thursday night game. On Sunday, it used to be at 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock East Coast time, two games. Now there's also a Sunday night game. They're spreading them out so that they put them out there more. And, if Netflix were to take that approach with MMA and put certain shows throughout the week, older shows. If they did UFC, they could also in the middle of the week pop you in there with Dana White's Contender Series. You might see another show pop up. UFC would probably fight for exclusivity, but again, Netflix has the deep pockets that they can put on, the PFL, UFC, and boxing. It's just a matter of scheduling them, not on top of each other at the same time so that you maximize for the combat sports audience. So it's an interesting proposition. I actually hope it happens because it'd be good for both sports to be seen more, take the level of eyes on it up. And, that's an accomplishment because, I don't think that we haven't seen pay-per-view numbers, come close to like, McGregor, Khabib, or some of the big ones like that. It's like so that trend upwards of eyes on the UFC, it seems to have cooled off a little
Yeah,
bit. They still make money because of new contracts and business deals and things, and even inflation. People are paying more for tickets probably and things like that. So the money still trends up a little bit, but the actual eyes and number of fans and people that are watching the sports is probably leveled off a little bit. So at the end of the day, the money will probably level off, in the near future, next 5 years or so. The pay-per-view model is people have been singing about how it's going to die for a decade now, really. Since Mayweather retired, people thought that there'd be a new model that comes along. When the UFC started to put shows, on television and not pay-per-view, and expanded so that now there are shows every week and stuff, and the pay-per-views are still every couple of months. And the fighter contracts used to be heavily oriented towards pay-per-view, percentages for the top shelf guys. And then all of a sudden the top shelf guys are like, wait a minute, how do I get compensated for, a show that's not on pay-per-view? So the Netflix contract would come in, let's say they said to the UFC, for a year's worth of content, we're going to give you $6 billion. I only mention that because those are probably the numbers that the NFL contracts or the NBA contracts at. Even $1 billion, I think that for a year, I think that the UFC would say, okay. So they get $1 billion there. They still have some other income streams. $1 billion guaranteed, and then they just do what they do now, which is produce a show. So some of that money, they can say, we'll take. People say that the UFC pays 16 to 18% of their total income streams to the fighters. So even if they said, look, if the $1 billion contract, we're going to take 200 million and add it to the purses of the fighters, that would make a difference. It would be a decent raise for everybody, and obviously the UFC would get what they usually get. This is barring any other types of changes to the way they have to do business. That's probably the way it would go. They'd probably keep some of those real exact numbers under the table so that people don't know how much they're getting, the executives and the companies getting compared to the fighters. But in an extreme sense, if they were actually to split 50-50, that would really make a difference, and you'd see the fighter pay go up to the point where, entry level might be 25,000. And keep in mind, an entry level fighter in the UFC could get 4 fights a year, 3, 4 fights a year, not two like the bigger guys. So, and that would make a difference. 25 and 25. Let's say you go 3-1. Now that fighter's making close to $200,000 a year. It's not huge money. You can't have a good year, go 4-0, make 200,000 on a 25-25 contract, and 25-25, 35-35, 45-45, 55-55. All right, now even entry level guys that have experienced some success and go through that, now they're making a couple $100,000 a year. You would start to see less and less of those fighters that are like, at the end of the day, I paid this out, the other thing, I'm left with $7,000. You know what I mean? Like is currently happening. The NBA, nobody in the NBA makes less than $1 million. 12th guy on the bench, it's getting at least $1 million a season. Bronny James, if I'm not mistaken, signed a contract and he's an incoming guy, but he's now a millionaire. And it's questionable how high his talent level is. So even an average guy who finally made it to the UFC, and he's probably never going to break through, but he'd get $25,000 for his first fight if he lost. Then he comes back for a second fight, makes 50 if he wins. He's 1-1. He's made $75,000. That's a very big difference to what the guys are going through now. And you could, like I said, you could do that. If you go 2-2, then your next fight is 35-35. You lost, and then you win your next fight. You're at about $180,000 for a year. That's at least puts you into more or less the upper middle class in the United States, and you're not dealing with a situation. Again, you're probably going to wind up with 100 after taxes, after paying your trainers. You're probably going to wind up with 90 of that for yourself. But that makes a big difference. 90,000, at least you can live, pay the rent, pay the mortgage, get your kids shoes and stuff. And there are UFC fighters right now that still are at the level where they're investing the money that they're making, hoping to break into bigger money because they're not making enough. So Netflix could change the whole, if they wanted to, and they were of the persuasion to do so, they could start a sporting division. They could decide what days they're going to do some programming, sign a contract with the UFC, sign a contract with boxing for some, a different spin and flavor. And I think boxing would probably, at this point, come cheaper than the UFC and MMA, and still give them quality content. And boxers at the lower level sometimes deliver unbelievable fights. You know what I mean? And I do the comparison of boxing is ballet and MMA is breakdancing. High level ballet, you see the training of the athlete shows. You've got guys that are so well trained in boxing and so poorly compensated that are never gonna even make a living off of the sport. Netflix would probably provide them some hope. So yeah, I think your dream might, not come to fruition. It might be a dream, but I think it's a good dream, and I think that it would have a lot of benefits. I think Netflix, like I said, if they're hurting for content, even at like $1 billion for a year, I don't know what the right number is. That's just a fantasy number, but even a year for a yearly fee to be able to count on 52 shows, or say 50 out of the 52 a week, or 48, whatever the UFC is able to, or says they can deliver. um I'd sign up for that. Then they especially if the UFC were to give them access to the library. Say for example, you know Netflix were to experience some success with the shows. um Netflix might be, what the UFC's been waiting for, because when was the last, you can go to YouTube and find somebody that, got their old VHS or DVD out and copied a Pride fight on there, and it's hit or miss whether in a couple of weeks it'll be there still, because those things get taken up, put down. What if the UFC were to say, okay, we'll give you access, here's Pride, here's the Strike Force library, here's the all those shows with Kimbo and Gina Carano that were on television that are hard to watch now. They could produce those again and put them on Netflix, and Netflix would have actually quite a lot of content. So yeah, it's the kind of thing where if you dream, there is an ability to lift the sport to a whole new level, and being able to see some of that historic stuff as well, I think, is something that is extremely limited now by the UFC. Yet we haven't even talked of that, and how that's a sign of a monopoly as well. Um, but if they were to release that now, Netflix, with their, again, deep pockets and ability to pay, that would be maybe something that the UFC say, yeah, we've been sitting on Pride because no one's going to pay for that right now. Well, here you have a chance to see all that. So yeah, I think potentially it might be just me and you talking. Who knows how it goes? But if Netflix were to um, be struck by lightning and hit with the idea, I think that it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, like for example, Ralph Macchio, William Zabka, Sensei Kreese, these people that played these guys, they haven't been famous for probably 30 years. But one
Ralph
series on
Macchio,
Netflix.
Mike Tyson can't go to the mall, but Ralph Macchio can.
Yeah, but one series on Netflix, and now these guys are recognizable to a whole new generation of people. They showed him at the Tyson Paul fight. Here's Ralph Macchio, Williams up. They're sitting next to each other. You know, yeah, those guys probably weren't invited to an event for God knows how long, maybe ever in their lives. Prior to that, because they were too young at the time.
And it goes to show how much money Netflix has, because Netflix is probably the entity. Jake Paul didn't pay for Ralph Macchio to be there.
Right.
Mike Tyson certainly didn't pay for him to be there. So it would have to be Netflix that made that happen.
Yeah.
And so it kind of goes to show the deep pockets they have, because those are the types of bells and whistles around an event that mark a big event is the shots of the crown, things like that. You don't see that at Hook and Shoot.
Or like Pablo Escobar's story. He's been dead for God knows how long. But Netflix makes a series Narcos and massive success. And there's probably a ton of people that had no clue who Pablo Escobar was prior to that series.
Yeah, no, and Netflix is, they've set the bar for modern distribution. You know what I mean? It's like, even the WWE, where they have a network and a distribution of their own that you can sign up for, 9.99, and their library is big enough that you could probably watch wrestling 24 hours a day. But I think they would sign with Netflix and shelve their distribution because Netflix is just better. It's just more access, and it's a worldwide
Yeah,
access.
I think Raw is
So
going to be on Netflix here soon.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. I think that's what and Matt, put your Dana White hat on here. I know you wouldn't want to do that, but you know, here he is, UFC, what was it, 309? He's over
Yeah.
there in Madison Square Garden and he's watching this. Cowboy Stadium, which he could never even come close to filling up, never even book it to even try. And, you know, millions upon millions of people watching this. What do you think he was thinking?
And, he's a sharp guy. His wheels must be turning. Maybe he can't wait till Monday to make a phone call and just get his foot in the door, see how it goes. Maybe assign somebody. Hey, Hunter, make this phone call while I go, you know, advise Trump. But you know, it's a good idea. It's something that hopefully somebody thinks of. Maybe Don Davis uses it to lift his league. You know, like I said, unless you're ready to do weekly shows, you can't compete with the UFC.
Right. And if
And
they
the
let the
PFL
UFC
still,
slide in after getting, Jake Paul, he's affiliated with the PFL. If they let the UFC slide in, that's just a major embarrassment for them.
they have a couple of things they have to fix. They have to fix their schedule so that they have a constant product flow, not just we're going to do 7 weeks in a row and then take a month off. That doesn't work. And then the other thing they have to do, and we were talking about this in a previous podcast, is like, let's say Sean O'Malley, the UFC were to rip up Sean O'Malley's contract because they're so powerful that they actually don't need the exclusivity anymore. Because Sean O'Malley's not going to go fight in any other company because he's already kind of broken into the higher end of money, and he's not going to go fight for 30,000 and 30,000 on some smaller show. So they'd be safe in ripping up the exclusivity for Sean O'Malley. The PFL may have the money to say, to pinpoint a star here or there, like an O'Malley, and say, no, we'll pay you what you get over there, 300,000 or whatever. Then O'Malley would have to look up, but the PFL doesn't even have their weight class active. They have certain weight classes that haven't operated and they have no roster for a couple of years now. So until they fix a constant ability of flow in their schedule and are set on certain weight classes that are always going to constantly be on the shows and not just pick and choose. We're going to do this weight class and this weight class and this weight class and this weight class, and all the others are going to be shelved. They're still not going to be in the ballpark. And Netflix, hopefully, I'm available as a consultant, by the way, just if they're out there listening. But hopefully, they would be aware of some of the shortcomings of PFL, that they're more than that. They don't have the history, and the PFL has done nothing to close the gap with the UFC. The gap has gotten bigger. So Don Davis can maybe go in there as a businessman and cut a deal, but and the long and short of it is that the PFL would be available for a fraction of what they'd have to pay for the UFC if Netflix was interested in saving some money, or just putting product out without really caring about the quality. But they have the money for the UFC. So in this case, and the UFC may say to him, "Look, we're going to be aboard. You can't. Please give us an exclusive deal at least for the first year or whatever. See how it goes, and, and don't bring PFL along." So there's a lot of politics there. There's a lot of things that we've known how warfare is with Dana and things, and the UFC, the Netflix people might say, take a meeting, listen, start to get involved, and realize this is a lot more complicated than I thought. And let's just pull the plug on it. It's not worth it.
If I'm Netflix, though, I go to Turkey Al Sheikh and say, look, we see you're putting on these big fights. You're willing to put up money to do. We have the platform. Maybe we can alleviate some of that financial that you're taking on, and we can put these fights in front of millions of people because your pay-per-views, aren't there, right now because of the way his
Yeah,
league
so
operates.
you watch fights on Netflix, and every once in a while you get hit with a Riyadh 2030 commercial.
Right, but
they
they could team up and really, okay, here, because he wants to have his own, kind of boxing entity. So,
Yep. Yep.
and
No,
he doesn't have the platform.
I agree that if we thought of it, you thought of it, then hopefully guys like Dana, Don Davis, the Sheik, the Netflix executives, guys that are operating at a high level and got there because they're on top of things. If we thought of it, hopefully they think of it, and we see some progress in the next year or so with a lifting of the MMA ball fields. That'd be great.
I still think it'd be more boxing just because of boxing's history. I think that if I was Netflix, I'd want boxing more. Just me personally.
Yeah, but yeah, the thing is with the UFC, you've bought the whole sport. Like I mentioned, the Pride Library, the Strike Force Library, even our Hook and Shoot Library, they own it. Whereas in boxing, if you wanted to also present historic events and things like that, and take advantage of the actual history, be able to show clips of old fights and things like that, you've got the Don King Library, the Bob Arum Library, and when those guys die, it'll be even harder to get your hands on those libraries because who knows who's going to take over control of that. You've got the Eddie Hearn Library. You've got, you know, uh, DeBella's Library. You've got boxing is very fractured, and also that what with every library also comes the promotions that are maybe still active, and you really literally would have to work with a bunch of different people, get access to fighters, put together a card. Or this week on Netflix Boxing, we're going to have Lou DiBella's card from New York City, with these guys here. And then the next week, in order to fill it, DiBella doesn't have cards every week. So the next week, you have Bob Arum Productions, and then the following week, Eddie Hearn in England. And, and so boxing, while probably cheaper in the long run, is also maybe more complicated to do the deals. So yeah, they could do both, and they should do both. If they're going to do something, they should do it big. And again, I would tell I'm available for consulting.
Like they just signed a new Turkey Al Sheikh. He signed a new 19.7 million.
Yeah.
So he could build up a stable that would be worthy of a platform.
Yeah, I think if and he should get together with somebody like the platform quickly and advance this to the next level because signing Inoue for 20 million sounds a lot like when DAZN signed uh, Canelo.
DAZN never
Right?
could have pulled off this Paul Tyson thing. It had to be on something like Netflix that everybody has.
And the PFL signed Ngannou. It's like, okay, what we've gone back to a tried and true example of the UFC did it right. They got lucky with the Bonner Forrest Griffin fight, but the very next week they put Randy Couture against Chuck Liddell on there. Shortly within the month, they had Ken Shamrock against Tito Ortiz. And that's the key to, it's fine to sign into it. When's the next time we're going to see him? Who's his opponent? What's on the horizon? What's your stable at that weight class that we can see and dream of? He's going to fight this guy next, or we're going to be sitting here in the same situation that we always have with boxing, which is like, how are we going to cut the deal when they have different management, different promotions? Netflix, maybe it'll throw enough money around at them, but again, I don't think Netflix is also a business. I don't think they want to go broke, making everybody in boxing who's been sitting around thinking we're waiting for the big money, the PBC. That never blew up either, you know. They've scaled back to the point where they have maybe the most frequent shows, but it's few and far between the big fights and things like that. So boxing will has not uncomplicated itself yet. If you kind of deal with the UFC, you kind of get the total package. So I think it's 50-50. I think the most interesting step would be if they did both.
You know how many subscribers Netflix has?
Is it more than 100 million?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
282 million.
Yeah.
So if you got a
it sounds
fraction
right.
of the people that subscribe to watch, that's still millions of people.
If they get 10% watching, you're close to 30 million eyes on your product, and that's better than any of these, uh, UFCs or boxing ever gets. It's like not to bring up the elections or anything like that, but when Kamala Harris does an interview on CNN or whatever, you get a couple of million views, and then Trump goes on Rogan and instantly has 40 million views. That's the difference. That's what you get. That's what it would be like to go from what the world and the landscape that we're in now and have this sport on Netflix. So yeah, I think it's a good eye, it's a good catch to see the potential there, and hopefully bigger people see and not only see it but move on it.
Now let's get to Jones Miocic. It's like it's kind of similar in a way to what we saw with Paul and Tyson. Miocic's a little too old, maybe not quick enough to. They're not a big gap, obviously, but he couldn't make his game work in a similar fashion. Because the athleticism, the difference was there. Was wide. Give me your thoughts on that.
Jones looked big. Jones looked big. He was bigger than Miocic too. You know, I always thought Jones was a more diverse fighter. He had a wider skill package. I think he showed that. I think Jones's fight IQ, once he's in a real fight and he focuses on it. I mean, when he got the trip takedown in the first round, before that, the exchanges, it looked like Stipe was, coming up short a little bit, not catching him, not, but he was swinging. And Jones still was putting his hand out with his fingers extended, but we avoided some of the dangers that presents. You know what I mean? And so the first few minutes, I thought maybe Stipe can land one. We know he's strong. We know he's a big hitter. Maybe he can land one that changes Jones's, uh, rattles him a little bit and changes the direction of the fight. But I thought he was fighting an uphill battle. I thought Jones was, making him come to him. And walking into that guy's range is, probably you're unlikely to be able to do it for 25 minutes, right? Um, and yeah, I think you saw that Jones is still, with fight IQ and things like that, probably the best guy we've ever seen in the UFC. And so be it. Stipe, when he was champion, had a lot of title defenses, and at one point was being called one of the top heavyweights of all time. And so this is another feather in Jones's cap, another uh, legacy maker. You know, um, again, in the case of Stipe, you can add asterisks. He's been out for so long. Maybe there was some rust. At the end of the day, even when he signed, I don't think that the treatment by the UFC made him feel the love kind of thing, that a real former champion, a decorated champion like him really deserved. I didn't see a lot of press hype, like big tours or anything like that for this fight. Like it could have been done the way they've done in the past. So it'll be interesting to see what the pay-per-view numbers wind up being for this one. Um,
Paul Tyson made the return of John Jones an afterthought.
it's sad. And the UFC's hype machine shouldn't have let that happen, but I don't think they ever turned it on for this fight.
I feel like it happened. Do you agree? I mean,
Yeah. No,
this
you're right.
this yeah.
The results for UFC were in the typical outlets, whereas the results for um the Mike Tyson fight were in every news outlet, foreign newspapers. I was looking at El País, La Nación, Spanish newspapers. Excuse me, but stuff from here in Central America, and it was front page news. The Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight. So yeah, it crossed over into being a Mayweather McGregor event. It may actually be bigger than Mayweather and McGregor.
I think for sure it was. I mean, arena wise, forget about it. Crowd size is significantly bigger, and more people saw it, no doubt about it.
Yeah, the other guys managed to make more money, so that would be the only argument, that makes him on par. But yeah, I think there's no doubt that they got themselves in front of more eyes. The thing about Mayweather and McGregor is both of them left that fight also um, as marketable. And Paul is going to be marketable because he's going to continue, with his hype train. Who knows who he'll pick as the next opponent, but I think he's topped off. Again, it's hard to take a pay cut. So if he made 40 million for this one, was he going to come take a harder fight against a younger man for 10 million? Why do that? And obviously, Mike Tyson should never be in the ring again.
Now, obviously a lot of people are curious, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I talked to Scott Burnett about it, but I want to get your thoughts. Dana White saying Jones Aspinall would be the biggest heavyweight fight in history for UFC, and it seems like, at least publicly, Jones doesn't want the fight.
Didn't deserve a shot.
Well, that's what Jones is saying. Dana's kind of been.
That's what Dana said a few months ago.
Right. But what I mean is, it seems like at least publicly Jones isn't interested in it. Do you believe him?
Jones is a sharp cookie. And I think he's like I said, you don't want to take a pay cut ever. Nobody does. So Jones already maybe starting to maneuvering. There'll be a number in his head that'll make him change his mind or change the rhetoric and do the fight. Maybe that number's out of reach for the UFC or something they won't do, and we'll never get it. But I think that's what it comes down to. I don't think, Aspinall, as good as he is and as flashy as his, stoppages are, and his record and stuff like that. What do you think? That John Jones is afraid of him? I don't think that's the case. I think this is
No, but I do think, like most fighters, there comes a point in time where they see the young guy who's, highly skilled, hungry, like they were when they were that person's age, and they're not that age anymore. And there's that small little bit of, I know I can't do X, Y, Z as well as I used to.
Yeah, I'm not sure John Jones feels he's deteriorating.
Because he's asking for Pereira, who he has a huge wrestling advantage over. That's who John's asking for, not Aspinall.
Yeah,
And Dana said after the show, I'm not going to make that fight. Why would I want to kill off Pereira with a bigger, much stronger wrestler? This is the fight to make. It's not Pereira and Jones.
What did Jones weigh for this fight?
I have no idea, but he was, like you said, he was big. And, the fact that he could take down Stipe the way he did, there's no doubt he'd take down Pereira too.
Yeah, Pereira's timing is a little different. Pereira might be able to make him pay in a different way. Um, but yeah, you've got something special in Pereira as well, and asking him to fight out of his weight class and stuff is not cool, and it's not exactly a uh, a call out by Jones that I'm impressed with. It is uh, you know a cheap name to throw around. He weighed 242 according to what I'm seeing, 113 kilos from what I'm seeing, which is about 242, 245 pounds. Pereira is said to come in at 220 when he cuts weight down to 185 or 205. It's not out of the realm of possibility that it could actually be around the same weight if he bulked up a little bit. So Pereira's a freak of nature. But Pereira right now came in at 93 kilos, so he's actually 20 kilos less, more about 45 pounds less than Jones. And like I said, that's not an impressive call out. And Jones really should do the Aspinall fight. That's the idea of Aspinall's paid his dues. Everybody they put in front of him, he's taken out, and he's taken them out in short order, in impressive fashion. And the other part of it is Jones is supposed to be the all-time champion. You say he might have a sliver of doubt. It's like there are more ways for Jones to win. We've never seen Aspinall in the fourth round. So pace your fight correctly, land your kicks, slow him down a little bit, avoid the damage avoid the big flurry, make him miss a little bit. And then all of a sudden, Aspinall is now in a world he's never been in, ever.
The reason I think Jones might be serious, though, is like when you look at Canelo, he's gleefully not fighting Benavidez. He could care less that everybody wants to see it. He's fighting everybody but him. And could care less that people are upset about it. And I think Jones could be thinking that too.
I don't know. I see Canelo as a guy that he's got a totally different psychology and makeup than Jones. I think somehow you gotta get to Jones, and he's got to feel challenged. It's like so instead of Dana, you might want to say something like, "We're going to try to get another couple of fights for John to seal his legacy and let him retire because Aspinall's the next big thing, and I don't think he can beat him." And let Jones hear that a little bit in public, and you'll see Jones all of a sudden get that dog in him up. But trying to say this is the next fight, you gotta do that may have not been the right approach. You gotta have some psychology in this. And Jones is a guy who's got a delicate psychology. He doesn't like when people don't call him the best. So I don't know if they approach it correctly. Whereas Canelo, since Mayweather retired, has been, forget Fury or the heavyweights, and even then, nobody's made the money he's made in boxing. He's faced some pretty serious challenges in there. He actually took a loss taking the challenge, fighting a bigger guy. Um, and so he's actually taking some risks and things. And Benavidez is one of those guys that, yeah, you know, maybe he's got his own reasons technically why he feels he doesn't want to do that fight. But Canelo earned a different type of privilege in my book than Jones. And the other part of it is that whether you like it or not, Canelo delivers a couple of fights a year, whereas Jones has sat for years and been in trouble for another years, and never, you know, Jones should. What's Jones's record now? I'll look it up here just to be sure. But the bottom line is Jones should probably have 8 more fights on his record if he had been fighting at the steady rate of Canelo, and that makes it he's 28-1, with that one being the questionable loss to Matt Hamill, 15 years ago. Since then, he hasn't been touched. He's got a no contest with Cormier.
No, a lot of people thought he'd lost to Dominic Reyes.
I've seen, people are fond of saying that. I don't think that
And
was
the first
case.
fight with Gustafsson too, a lot of people thought.
He didn't lose that fight either. In my book,
To say you haven't been touched, I mean, those were competitive fights.
I think there's a little bit of hype around him. I think I've gone back and watched him afterwards, and to me, he clearly won the fights. Yeah, he wasn't as impressive, but Anderson Silva didn't look all that great against Talos Lattis. Yeah, it's a different. Gustafsson had better moments than Lattis did. Obviously, it's not a perfect comparison, but everybody has a little bit of an off day. But I don't think, in particular, in none of those fights was Jones ever close to being finished. It's not like that, like it was that way. So you'd have to have judges that saw certain things and wanted to judge it that way. But if I were a judge, those fights go to Jones. And I'm not a Jones fan. I think Aspinall is interesting. Is maybe could be built up to be the biggest fight of all time, because it could be built up as Jones's greatest challenge, as a young gun now coming for Jones, who's no longer the young gun, who once was the young gun. Is the torch being passed? There's a lot to work on in this fight. But I think it is a psychological thing where you've got to work on Jones the right way to bring him to the table and bring him to the fight. And I think, like I said, superficially, I think the approach would have been, we're going to see what we do next with Jones. We're gonna let Aspinall sit off to the side, because I don't think Jones can beat him, and I think Aspinall's the next big thing. And I think Jones his ears would go up, because you don't think I can beat him, because that's been perennially what his motivations are. And you can see when Jones is kind of fake. I don't think he's a guy with a good public persona. And you can see when he's trying to be kind of happy, kind of neutral, positive, engaging with the public. He's kind of fake a little bit. But you could also see very much when he goes dark. And it's moments like that when he actually feels like this guy thinks he can beat me. That insults him. Look at when he told Daniel Cormier that he would kill him. That's a perfect moment of Cormier was a threat. Cormier showed that confidence, and there were enough people that possibly thought Cormier was the guy to beat him, that Jones was right there with his ego and his attitude. And like we pointed out on multiple occasions on this podcast, he could come into the public with that little contrite persona now when he's trying, but he looks fake, and we know that that dark side is still there, that that ego is still there, that he hasn't solved his problems. So I think Jones can be talked into this fight if it's done the right way. But maybe Aspinall should show up in Ithaca and steal his Bentley.
Now, I want to parlay into something else I know that you're wanting to discuss, and that was this McGregor case. It doesn't seem like it's getting as much attention, at least even in the MMA news sphere. It doesn't seem to be. But I know that some things you've paid attention to. I want to kind of let you talk a little about that.
Well, one of the things that we didn't talk about is that Michael Chandler, after waiting, for McGregor for years, fought this last week, and now he's 2-4 in the UFC. I think mission accomplished for the UFC. They took a Bellator champion, they milked him for all he was worth. And at the end of the day, he went 2-4 in the UFC, proving once again that the Bellator roster and capabilities to create a fighter are not what the UFC's is.
And that's also why he waited. You just saw why he waited. Because if he took on somebody else, he's probably going to get beat.
Yeah, and sitting out years where you're healthy and 36 years old and then returning to fight when you're 38, and I think Chandler's 38 by now. This is why the UFC's management and dealings with fighters is easily open to criticism if you're judging this as a sport. And this is where they just don't handle it as a sport whenever it is convenient for them. And, switching opponents on McGregor and things like that, they didn't handle McGregor correct either. Like I said, the way with McGregor would have been to have a plan for him. If he had fought when they originally were going to fight, he should have been offered the Leon Edwards fight for the 170-pound title. And that, we've talked about that. And that would have given McGregor the legacy of being the first guy with 3 belts in 3 weight classes. And that puts him back actually in the GOAT discussion. I think you could have motivated him like that, got him off the boat, so to speak, But they had no plan. They mishandled McGregor, but they obviously mishandled Chandler as well. And they didn't care because they thought, and they're right, if you start changing opponents on McGregor all the time, McGregor's not the young guy where he said, sure, I forget, I think it was Rafael dos Anjos who broke his foot or hurt his foot at one point, and they slipped him Nate Diaz. McGregor's no longer in the boat where he has to do that. You remember John Jones when they tried to switch opponents on him, they had to actually cancel a card because he wouldn't take a short notice opponent. I think you find McGregor more in that boat. It's like, nah, whatever excuse he comes up with, The news that Todd is talking about is that McGregor was in court this week in Ireland facing sexual assault charges. And we're talking about a Kobe Bryant, also Monica Lewinsky situation where apparently there is DNA evidence that he was involved with this girl. His wife / girlfriend, I'm not sure if they're married or if it's still a Commonwealth marriage or whatever. They've been together for a long time. She puts up with a lot. Now he's here in public facing these allegations. He's 36. And Dana White recently said that we'll see him at the end of next year now, November 2025. When they canceled the fight because of his toe, he said that we'll see him fight before the end of the year. We'll pencil him in for November. Well, here we are through November. He's in court. He's not ready to fight. He's not going to be ready to fight. Very much so, it looks more and more like I'll say 2 things. Very much so, it looks more and more like we may never see Conor again. But even if he were to fight, I think we can firmly say that the era of Conor McGregor is over. came in like a lion, went out like a lamb.
Yeah, I mean, you and me have both said we don't think he fights ever again. So
Yeah, yeah. This is more proof of that. Again, these poor things take their toll. He's got to go home and face his wife. In a private setting. Yeah, he probably handles it with you know crushing her emotions and feelings, not listening to her, and things like that. It provides a lot of baggage. And again, putting together 8 week, maybe the 12-week training camp, this guy's just not capable of that anymore. His ego's too big. He's got too many other things going on. He's actually, if you've caught him on the right interviews, he's also said things like he's already accomplished everything he wanted to accomplish, especially when it comes to earning a fortune. His money and his kids' money and things like that are taken care of, and that was always the ultimate goal for him. From a guy who came from nothing to now have the riches he has, he's justified to be satisfied. You know what I mean? It's like you can't begrudge him if he says that's what I wanted. The fight legacy and being the greatest fighter in the world is second to that. I understand that. I'm okay with that. I would try to use the legacy and stuff like that to motivate him. But you gotta get in his head. You gotta get that conversation when he's focused. You know. But I recently saw the interview with him and Jake again, where he was all on drugs and things, and um, yeah, I he's done.
and I think his ego is different than John Jones. He's doubt from him would make him not want to do something.
Yeah, yeah, no, completely different ego than John Jones. John is a dark, brooding person, and Connor at this point is kind of like enjoying being on top of the world, enjoying being the center of attention. I think that right there kind of sums it up. Jones, everywhere he goes, is the center of attention, but I'm not sure he loves that. McGregor loves being the center of attention everywhere he goes. At the pub, everywhere. He's the center of attention. He likes it. I mean, if he's not, sometimes that's where maybe these situations get created where he becomes it.
And he's going to
Jones is
crash and
about
burn, like being in court. He's going to crash and burn like so many, other people have because his desires are going to get him.
yeah. The thing too is we alcohol is definitely I believe a problem with him. He owns a pub. He's been seen on video multiple times drunk, not just happy buzz. I mean drunk. Um, we suspect chemicals are involved. We suspect also that there's maybe a steroid problem, which also has some effects on your psychology and things like that. And out of all these problems, and this is also a bugaboo with Jones, um, I think the one that gets the least talked about, and a term that you don't hear ever bandied about, but is actually the most severe of the problems, is sexual addiction. And you get older, you start to be able to control yourself. That's why, you sow your wild oats as a young man, and then you get married and you're supposed to settle down and hopefully you can keep your marriage together and have a family and have a legacy and stuff like that. And that means that you put the desires aside. If you never put the desires aside, like all the other alcohol and things like that, these problems escalate and become more and more difficult to control. And the sexual addiction part is a part that people don't talk about in public. It's a part that's much harder to get help for, much harder for people to even identify it as a problem. But it certainly seems to be a problem, probably with both of our UFC champions. you know, and
Definitely
maybe
with McGregor. Definitely.
and maybe with the matchmakers and the CEO.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's not as something to where they're in court for it. But McGregor just doesn't seem to be able to. He's had these allegations many times, and that's why I think for him he's going to crash and burn at some point. It's just when.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, it's interesting because you know, with money you can compare him to Mayweather, you know, but Mayweather doesn't drink. Mayweather, you know, he may have some of that. You know, we've seen him in strip joints, and there've been allegations of women around him and stuff like that. Mayweather, it would be a good example for him to actually follow Mayweather because Mayweather's a lot more controlled than he actually. I think he likes to appear wild, which is very contrived and not as wild. Whereas Connor's a legitimate loose cannon. And I don't think when you say crash and burn, you know, I think you know he could even let's say in the worst case scenario winds up doing 3 to 5. He's still gonna have money.
Right, but
You
what I
know,
mean is when you give all these regular people, you're famous. You're giving all these regular women access to you who aren't famous. Whether you're doing bad things or not, it's just not a good idea.
yeah, he said that the woman who's accusing him is a woman who was in his circles. So let's say that she was a regular at his bar or something like along that, you know, that kind of thing, and that she used to constantly text him. So he couldn't say no. Again, those are the types of things that people don't address at the core of what they are, and that is, you know, an addiction to the attention, addiction to the activity, the sexual activity, and things. Um, but that's out there. There are 12-step programs for sex addicts, you know, and it's a very difficult one of the addictions. It's probably the one that has the least statistics, the least publicity, the highest rate of relapse, if you want to call it that. Um, so yeah, he's got an unusual mix of problems. I think all that adds up to actually um, what we've said before, and you've just repeated in this podcast, is that we'll never see him fight again.
Yeah, and with celebrities, most celebrities don't give the common person access to them. They have their
Yeah, yeah,
circle, they have their
yeah,
celebrity
yeah,
circle, and they don't go outside of that very often
yeah.
for a reason.
I'm sure that Connor has like a couple bodyguards or you know some people that are watching him like that, but it doesn't seem to be. He seems to be, you know, when you know, I've had my partying when I was younger and stuff like that, and I enjoyed getting lost on my friends and just going off on my own. You know, it's a character defect, and I've got, you know, I have my own problems and stuff like that. But when you're drinking and nobody can keep up with you, and that's just one example, you do want to just do your own thing. So, and Connor does seem to be left alone for a rich person who should be constantly with a companion, with an inner circle of people that are there to take care of him. He does seem to pop up alone a lot, you know? He should never be just sitting at his bar drinking and hosting people without somebody there who's capable. And this is the other part is we've also said he doesn't have anybody that really breaks through to him. You know what I mean? I can say, okay, that's your last one. You've had 12. You know what I mean? You're going home after this. I'm taking you home. Because he would say, the fuck yeah, who the fuck are you? You know, and we all know that that's the way that McGregor will handle it. And in these cases, you know, when you go off with a woman and now, you know, who knows, you're going to a hotel and stuff like that, you ditched anybody that is supposed to be taken care of. That's just kind of speculation, but I think that's kind of the way Connor operates it. Nobody tells him what to do. And when, the somebody tries, he goes off and does his own thing. And then he winds up getting in trouble. And here he's in court. Um, she has clothes with his semen on it. And so now
Now,
the
in his
interesting part,
defense, if it was consensual, that
that's
could
why I was
also be
gonna
the same thing. Yeah.
that's what I was gonna say is that, having semen on the clothes doesn't mean that it wasn't consensual. At the end of the day, at the moment, Lewinsky and Clinton was consensual. Later on, obviously, her regret and shame, and you know, there's a comedian, but Monica Lewinsky goes down as the most famous blowjob of all time. You know what I mean? So, she's got to deal with that baggage the rest of her life, and that starts to weigh down on you. But at the moment, it was consensual. So who knows what this girl has been through, thinking, oh yeah, I was with Connor, but then, you know, he was kind of abusive to me a little bit. And now that I think about it, I don't feel good about it. And the psychology changes. But he has a longtime girlfriend or wife with kids back at home, and that doesn't have the prevention capabilities that it really should. He doesn't give a shit when he's buzzed about his relationship or his kids or anything like that. All that goes out the window, is forgotten, and he goes off and does his own thing. Those are bad signs. He may not be guilty in court, but he still has a problem he has to address.
Yeah, and if he doesn't, like I said before, it'll sink him.
Yeah, yeah, here's the thing: is maybe the buck should stop here. Hopefully, the judge, if he's found guilty, and I'm not sure what the system is exactly in England. If he's going to have the peers, a trial of peers, or your jurors that find him guilty, and then the judge applies a sentence. But somehow he should get the book thrown at him, and a strict, tough sentence and punishment should be applied to him. Because if he were to be found not guilty, or if he were to be given a suspended sentence, and because he's a celebrity, he pays a fine, he can pay any fine he wants, right? He's going to do it again. So yeah, that's where, as you're saying, he's going to crash and burn. Is he, he's shown that consistently something like this comes up, whether it's beating up somebody for a cell phone in Florida, punching a reporter in the face in a hotel in Italy, punching old mafioso in a bar in Ireland, and although that one where he hit the guy, the older man with the bar in Ireland, if you believe the whole story that's out there, um, led to the Irish mob putting $1 million hit on his head that he had to kind of politic his way out of. That should be a message. That should be a close call like that. Serious guys, a close call like that should have been the wake up call that he needed, and it wasn't. So, what would be strong enough to be a wake up call for this guy? To have $500 million in the bank, but be doing 2 years' time. So, yeah, it's interesting because, like I said, Mike Chandler put his career on hold for this guy. Mike Chandler at least, did what a pro would do and came back and fought as soon as he could. And, Connor's been promising the spectacle of his return, and the return to the greatest fight of all time, and we're going to make the biggest fight of all time, and it's just been talk. And here, again, even Dana is saying we're now a year off from ever seeing him again. So in another year, I think his birthday's in July, so in another year, he'll be 37 years old. That's so many years of his prime, you know, If he's got 500 million in the bank or in net assets right now, he could have 600. If that the pursuit of money and things like that is also what floats his boat, you know, he could probably be worth 20 to 50% more than he's actually worth right now if he's been consistently fighting. So yeah, this is already bordering on a tragedy of epic proportions. Right now, it is already a minor tragedy, and as a fan of the sport and Conor McGregor fans, he's robbed them of 4 years of his prime already.
Yeah, it's a lot of interesting stuff to kind of go over this weekend. That's a lot of interesting stuff happened, and one thing I would also say is McGregor Oliveira looked light years better than McGregor than Chandler the last time they fought. So it just showed not only did Chandler wait for McGregor, he hasn't improved at all. He's regressed probably. He got out wrestled by Oliveira, pretty significantly. It was bad.
Oliveira finished in the first time. Oliveira was able to, from the judges, Oliveira won the first 4 rounds, and then they gave Chandler. It looks like they gave him the last round. Oliveira is an interesting guy, but Oliveira is a guy that you can say is pretty solely focused on the sport. He's also, at this point, still 3 years younger than Chandler. So even though he's got a lot of miles, he's closing in on 50 fights. He's at 35-10 now, I'm looking. So he's at 45 fights. He's got a lot of mileage on him. And, when when Sarukian and Makachev, the guys, maybe that's some of the mileage showing when he took his losses recently, but he's still able to summon the beast. And Chandler at 38, yeah, you say he hasn't improved. I don't believe really in ring rust for 23-year-olds, 25-year-olds. But by 38, you have to assume that it could be an issue, that the muscle memory has forgotten a little bit of what you're so accustomed to doing. He sat on the bench for exactly 2 years. His last fight was November 12th against Poirier, and now it's November 16th that he fought against Oliver, 2022 to 2024. So 2 years, which, at 2 fights a year, assuming that's 3 fights more that he should have had, 3 paydays more that he should have had, that, he lost giving it up. And maybe, when the McGregor fights got canceled, the UFC slipped him a check and stuff. So it's not so much financial, but it's the legacy and it's the ring rust and just the not having been active that Oliveira's a hell of a fighter too.
Yeah, but I mean, Chandler wrestling is a strength, and he just got tossed around.
Yeah, and Chandler, yeah, I since he's come to the UFC, Chandler's really, maybe you could say Dan Hooker is not an absolute top shelf guy, but Dan Hooker's not really a slouch either. And everybody else has fought Gaethje, Poirier, now Oliveira a couple of times, even Ferguson, who he beat, and Ferguson was on his downslide, but Ferguson at one point was top shelf. So they at the end of the day, what we always said used to happen to UFC, to Bellator guys heading into the UFC, is that the UFC would set about getting them beat to prove the point that they were superior to Bellator. Whether you like it or not, Chandler's legacy is now he's 2-4 at the end of his career. McGregor contributed to that too.
Right, but I think the reason he sat was because if he fought anybody, and this showed that he would lose, and now that fight was going to be gone. So he was willing to sit a little bit longer rather than risk that.
Yeah, no,
Although
I
I
agree with.
think him losing actually makes McGregor probably more interested in fighting him than less.
I agree, but you could have had him play doorman to a little bit lesser opposition than the frontline opposition he got, and he might have had a better shot at winning some of those fights than Poirier and Gaethje. Oliveira was a good champion twice now, has beaten him, so he's shown his level. It's right below the championship level. Guys trying to break into championship level, there's a lot of guys he beat that are getting there. I'll give you an example. He probably would have beat Dariush. Probably Dariush is a little slow in my book. I like Dariush, but he's a tough guy, but a little slow, a little less gifted as an athlete. Dariush would have been a good example of a fight that I'd favor Chandler in. I don't know if I favored him in any of those other ones.
Yeah, it's hard to say whether sitting was beneficial or not for him. I agree with you. I think UFC slipped him some money.
I think it's easy to say. I think it was not beneficial at all.
Yeah, yeah. But the reason I think he sat, like I said, is one, the
No, no,
UFC had to have been paying him. If they didn't, he's crazy. The
yeah,
UFC had to give him
and
some
and
money.
and with the McGregor, supposedly you get more money from McGregor. Some people like Cerrone have said that that's kind of overrated and stuff like that. But I think Chandler's a guy that, if you beating McGregor is a legacy maker too. And I think that's another reason he waited is because that is the big fight for multiple reasons, not just the payday, but also for his ego, for the bump in, you know, recognition, notoriety, legacy, all that stuff. And those all combined to be reasons why he sat around. And also McGregor, you know, at the end of the day, he never stopped saying he was going to do the fight. So maybe he got suckered a little bit by McGregor and believed him too much. I didn't get suckered by him. We knew.
Yeah, we're on record saying he's never fighting again, and we've been saying that for a long time.
His next fight's behind bars.
Yeah. I was the first one to come out and put that out that fight was canceled. That was a long time ago. That was right after the PFL Bellator sale thing that I had dropped. That was the next one I dropped. So yeah,
Yeah,
he's not fighting again. Miguel doesn't think so. I don't think so. And I think most people are coming around to that thought.
yeah, he's 36. If somehow next year he'll be 37, just give me a second here. Let's see. I don't think he's fought already in 3 years, right? I don't know how long has he been on the shelf. Let's find this out here because I think we're going to be upwards of 4 years. So like I said, even if he fights again, the Conor McGregor era is over. He hasn't fought since July of 2021. So it will be, if he fights at the end of next year, it'll be 4.5 years since we've last seen him in the octagon. At 37, he'll be coming back. This is if everything works out perfectly. Those are not good circumstances to be returning to. I was just looking at some of the old boxing history and Jack Johnson, when he won the world title in 1908, defended it a few times. And by 1910, Tex Ricker, the promoter, and lured James Jeffries out of retirement. And Jeffries had retired 19-0. And he was the undefeated champion. And Jeffries is the original Great White Hope in boxing. We've heard that Jerry Cooney in our lifetime, and that name pops up periodically. But the first Great White Hope who was supposed to beat the feared black champion who won the heavyweight title was Jim Jeffries. Jeffries is coming out of a 5-year retirement. He was 330, sitting on his farm, retired. Jack Johnson got a $25,000 bonus to do the fight as a champion. They were paying him well. He was rich. That $25,000 is about $1 million, or that's a bonus. He made about $5 million in today's money for that fight. Jeffrey's got a $75,000 bonus to come out of retirement and do the fight. And he got himself down to 226 pounds. But Johnson ran him over. And McGregor, maybe he's not going to have 100 pounds to lose. But first, he's going to have some poundage probably to lose. And second, he's put his body through almost, the overeating on the other part, but the drugs, the partying, the, lack of rest, lack of taking care of your body. I have no hope for him if he's fighting at the end of next year that we're going to see anything but a shadow of his former self.
Yeah, the UFC needs to let it go.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess mentioning his name is good for publicity still, perhaps.
Yeah, hopefully it gets us more hits.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, we always tell people, please subscribe, check out our stuff, share it with other people, get it in front of more people if you like the show, and we always appreciate your support. Miguel.
Todd made me sign up on Discord, so come hang out with us on Discord.
Oh yeah, have you posted on there yet on the Ryzen Discord?
I didn't post. I posted hello on there. I didn't post much more than that, but I had a conversation with a couple of people. We were talking about Donald Trump's press agent, Asian guy named Steve Chung. And this is interesting news because Chung has been with Trump for a long time. But Steve Chung, a lot of people may not know this, Steve Chung was a UFC employee up until 2016, and his job was to be the guy that bans press people that are not pro-UFC friendly. So he's widely considered to be one of the guys that used to X and get rid of real journalists to put in guys that were handpicked by them. So he was an axeman for the UFC and then went over to work for Trump. A little trivia for everybody.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a Ryzen Discord we're talking about. So if any of you are fans of Ryzen, you can probably look it up on Discord and find it.
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yeah, I think Miguel, and I really mean this, I think Miguel gets some of the best insight of anybody in our community, period. And, just lucky to have him share his stuff with me. So.
Well, thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. I think that, you're the best partner I've ever had. I don't think we have the hugest audience in the world, obviously, but I think that both of us work genuinely and from the heart, and I think that the people that appreciate that notice that. So I'm grateful.
Yeah. We'll get there. All right, Miguel. As always, it's great talking to you. Awesome weekend wrap up inside. And until next time, everybody, appreciate your support. Signing off. Take care.
Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.